Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to be reviewing definitions for equations. First we have parallel lines. Parallel lines have the same slope but different y-intercepts. If you look at the graph in the equations, we have y equals 2/3 x plus 2 and y equals 2/3 x minus 1. Notice that, remember, the slope is m, which is before the x value. They both have 2/3, meaning parallel lines have the exact same slope. Next, we have perpendicular lines. Perpendicular lines have negative reciprocal slopes in which you flip and negate the slopes. So for example, I have perpendicular lines, and remember perpendicular means they intersect to create 90-degree right angles. And notice the two formulas here. Y is equal to negative 4/3 x plus 5, and y is equal to 3/4 x minus 2. Notice that the slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. If I take 3/4 and I flip it, that becomes 4/3, and then I negate it, negative 4/3. If you look over to the right here, to find a negative reciprocal slope, you flip and negate. So you take 1/3, you flip it, which becomes 3, and then you negate it, which becomes negative 3. And then negative 2/5, you flip, it becomes 5/2, and if you negate an already negative number, it becomes positive. So remember, perpendicular lines have negative reciprocal slopes in which you flip and negate the slope. Next, we have the slope formula. The slope formula is m is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Remember, when we're discussing slope, it's the rise over run. So notice I have 2 points, negative 3, 8, and 2, negative 11. I labeled each point x1, y1, x2, y2. And then I simply substitute into the formula. So negative 11 minus 8 over 2 minus negative 3. And remember, we can put this in our calculator and we will get negative 19 over 5. Next, I have the midpoint formula. x1 plus x2 divided by 2 and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. We add our x values together, divide by 2, and we add our y values together, divide by 2. And remember, when we're looking for the midpoint, we're looking for the middle of a line segment. You might see the word bisected, which means we're looking for the point in the middle after it creates two congruent parts. So here is an example of using the midpoint formula. I add my x's together, I add my y's together, and I get the point 1, 3. And remember, it's a point, so it has to have parentheses around it. Next, we have the distance formula. The distance formula is d equals the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. When we're using the distance formula, we're looking for the length of a side. Remember, the key words for this are perimeter and congruent. So take a look at the example. If I have a point A, negative 1, negative 1, and B, 4, negative 5, I'm going to label each point x1, y1, x2, y2, and substitute it into the formula. Remember, when you're using the distance formula, you don't put the square root into the calculator, you just put what's underneath the into the calculator. And the answer is radical 41. So remember, we use the distance formula to find the length. And finally, we have perpendicular bisector. To find the equation of a perpendicular bisector, you have to follow the 4 steps. Step 1, first find the midpoint. Remember, the midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Number 2, you find the slope using the slope formula. M is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Third, you find the perpendicular slope, so you take the slope for number 2 and you flip and negate it. And finally, with step 4, you put the midpoint from step 1 and the perpendicular bisector slope for step 3 into the point slope form. Y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1, and that will give you the equation to the perpendicular bisector.